Good morning, friends. I'm glad to be with you today. VBS is coming up. You can see it all around you. If you happen to drive by our property on Wednesday and you saw a bunch of ministers in the West Field dressed like Michael Jackson, the music video was being filmed. We're excited. We're doing Gideon this year, and I'm really thankful to Sarah Pierman and Amy Scott, our VBS directors, and the other children's staff, and all of our volunteers who are going to help make it be a great week. If you have not registered your children, whether you're a member or whether you're a guest, all children need to be pre-registered. You need to do that today. Go ahead and go online and do that. We have that available in several places on our website. Make sure that kids get registered so you're not stuck in that long line the first day of VBS, because that's no fun. We want to know that your kids are coming so that we can prepare for them and prayerfully anticipate their arrival. We need tour guides as well. Those are our adults who really, it doesn't have to be adults, but those are those who really help make this happen. Those are the ones who take the kids around. We need a lot of folks to help be tour guides. So if you're available, VBS is next week, the 21st through the 23rd. If you're available to help, we need you. Would you today go back where we have the VBS t-shirts? Would you please go and sign up to be a tour guide? We really need your help to make this a great time for these kids. I'm amazed at the stories they tell about how much they love VBS, and I'm very thankful to have a very small part in a week that means so much to kids, and I want you to have that as well. So if you can be a tour guide for us during VBS, we would be grateful. And finally, we're going to need cookies. We need you to bring cookies, and you can bring those to Fellowship Central at any time. We need cookies for VBS. That is an integral part of the VBS experience. And so if you can bring us some cookies sometime in the next few days, we would be very, very grateful for that, and the kids will be as well. Roberta Thomas was born in 1914, although I didn't come to know her until the early 1980s when I was a young child and she was already in her 70s. She was a member where I grew up at the Faith Village Church of Christ in Wichita Falls, Texas. And she doted on me. In fact, she kept a photo of me in her wallet. She was my adopted grandmother, I guess you might say. And she would say to me often when she would see me in the lobby before or after services, she'd come up to me and she'd say, "I just know you's gonna be a preacher." That's what she'd say to me. Now, in her parlance, preacher meant any kind of minister. As you can tell, I'm not technically a preacher. I teach more than I preach. But she just knew I was going to work at a church and preach. And she said that to me all the time in her wise, old stage of life. She said, you're going to be a preacher. We're in the middle of our sermon series called Seasons. And last week, Phil talked about retirement-aged people and the gifts they can offer. And this week we're talking about our oldest people, those who are past retirement. Several of you came up to me this morning beforehand and you looked at your bulletin and you just said, "Oh, it looks like you're preaching on old people today." Well, yes, I am. I am indeed, and I'm excited about it. The Bible has lots to say about people who have attained great age. In the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses is preaching to the people and telling them what to do in this new land and how they can be faithful to God, he tells them to remember the days of old, consider the generations long past, ask your father and he will tell you, your elders and they will explain it to you. So Moses says, if you're going to be faithful to God in this new land, you have to let the old people tell you their stories of what's happened so that you can be faithful, so that you can build on their successes, so that you can avoid their failures. Let the elders, the older people of the community, explain to you what's happened before so that you can have success in the days ahead. Or if you go to the book of Leviticus, and in chapter 19, you get this long list of seemingly disconnected commands that have to do with how the poor are treated, how hired workers are treated, how deaf and blind and disabled persons are treated, how immigrants are treated. In the middle of all that, we get this command: to stand up in the presence of the aged, to show respect for the elderly and revere your God. I am the Lord. So respect for the elderly is tied directly to revering God. Those things are viewed together because I am the Lord. So in the midst of this chapter on treatment of vulnerable persons, we get a command about respect for the elderly, because as we know, in many ways, they are vulnerable in society, vulnerable physically, vulnerable to people taking advantage of them. And so Leviticus reveals the heart of God, that elderly people are important and deserve our respect. Or in Proverbs chapter 16, and I bet many of you older people can quote this verse because you probably use it on other people, and as well you should. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 31, gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness. Yes, sir. The Bible reveres people who have attained these ages. Isaac, for instance, was 180 years old when he died. Abraham, about 175. Jacob, 147. Sarah, 137. These important people in the biblical story lived into an old age and were effective and respected even in, maybe even especially for, their old age. The Bible reveres people who are old. But I'm not sure our society does. Are you? I'm just not sure. In the year 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, and the heavens opened up, and the grounds opened up, and all of creation in the city of New Orleans was enveloped. There were about 2,000 deaths because of that disaster. But did you know that about 50% of those deaths were people older than 75? They only made up 12% of the population, but 50% of the deaths from that disaster. That's a terribly disproportionate amount. And we can imagine how that works. People who cannot maybe move around easily on their own and no one looks out for them or takes care of them or moves them to safety. Half the deaths, Katrina, were people older than 75. In 1900, the life expectancy was about 45 years old. It is now 79 years old. We have an increasing number of older people in our society, and yet we seem to be abandoning this growing group of people. In the book from the 1960s called The Coming of Age, which is about how the elderly seem to be separated and distanced from society, the French philosopher and writer Simone de Beauvoir says that the attitude of a society toward its elderly is a really good indication of its values. That how we treat older people says a lot about who we are. And in an age and society where ageism is rampant, where we seem to worship youth sometimes, I don't know what it says about us. I don't know what our treatment of older people says about us. Some of you, especially who've done work in any kind of educational field, will know the name Erik Erikson, who was a developmental psychologist. And he theorized about the different life stages. And the one we're talking about today, he would call late adulthood. And for him, every stage in life involved a crisis between two things. And he said that in late adulthood, the crisis was integrity versus despair. What he meant by that was, can you look back on your life and believe that it was well lived and that you fulfilled your purpose and your life had some integrity to it? Or do you despair because you have many regrets and you don't feel like your life was well lived? And he said that navigating this crisis correctly, doing this successfully, leads to wisdom. That's the quality that happens when you navigate that. Wisdom that looks back on life with a sense of closure and completeness and wisdom that's able to accept death without fear. So what do we do? How can we help people move toward integrity and away from despair? I want to talk to two groups of people. I want to talk to the rest of us for our obligation toward the elderly, and then I want to talk to those of you who are in that late adulthood stage today. And I just want to give us some things that we might live by that I think are rooted in Scripture for how we treat people. The first thing I would say to all of us, to the rest of us, is that we have to respect the elderly. And that sounds really nebulous. What does that mean? Who is the elderly? What do I do? Here's a good starting point, okay? If a person has been a Christian longer than you have been alive, I think we start from a place of respect. That doesn't mean that they're always right. That doesn't mean that they get to call the shots all the time. That doesn't mean that your younger voice doesn't have a place. That doesn't mean that all older people are great people, just like the rest of us. We're not all great people. But it means that we start from a place of respect. If a person has lived their faith out through things you've never imagined in your own life, I think there's some respect due there. I think we have to treat our older Christians with a high amount of respect instead of skepticism and cynicism and dismissal that we sometimes do. And for those times we've done that, we're wrong. And we need to repent, because when we do that, it is wrong to treat them with anything other than respect. I would say also that we minister with them and not just to them. People in late adulthood don't just need us to come and be nice to them and sometimes some patronizing kind of ways. They have lots of capabilities left. Their bodies might not be in the condition that they were decades ago, and they might have different kinds of ministries they can do. But I'm telling you what, people in this stage can do great ministry if we will come alongside them and minister with them, not just to them. I think the third thing we can do is listen to their stories. I mean, my goodness, the majority of the civil rights leaders in the United States from the civil rights movement, they came from the generation that is currently the elderly generation, the silent generation. Fred Gray, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, the Little Rock Nine, more and more. There's more that we could list. Can you imagine the stories that generation can tell? Can you imagine the wisdom they could give us if we would only put down our screens, if we would be quiet for a minute, if we would stop talking like we're the most important people in the world and listen to those stories, because they have incredible ones to tell. The stories that Moses wanted the elderly folks in Israel to tell. And finally, I would say that we ought to show the love of Christ in our caregiving. I read this and it floored me. Statistically, people stop visiting when a person gets a diagnosis related to dementia. That bothers me. It bothers me about myself. It bothers me for what we think about folks with those kinds of difficulties. And I don't know the reasoning behind that. I know sometimes it's difficult to make those visits. It's uncomfortable sometimes, or we think the person won't care or remember us. But knowing that half of people who reach their late 80s are going to have some form of this, and yet we just abandon them and don't visit them, don't care for them. Those of you who are doing that kind of caregiving, I'm very, very thankful for you. I'm very thankful for the work that you do, because it's hard to give that kind of care. And yet it's very, very important that we show the love of Christ in our caregiving. When a person in late adulthood reaches the point where they cannot care for themselves, a great way to show the love of Christ is to give love and care and attention to a person who may not be able to reciprocate much of that. And that's hard. Then I would turn to those of you who are in this stage of life. I don't know what a guy in his mid-30s, I don't know what business I have telling you anything. But here's what I would ask of you. Here's what we need from you. We need you to teach us how to pray. When I hear people in your generation pray, I hear a lifetime of wisdom that no one else has. And I hear the concerns you pray for. And I hear the depth of your prayers. And it is meaningful to me. And it teaches me how to pray because you have so many concerns on your heart. You have family members you're worried about. You have spouses that you're worried about. You have the future, people that you'll leave behind that you're worried about. You have lots to be thankful for. And you mention those in your prayers, and when I hear them, I'm so thankful and I'm so moved. So teach us younger ones how to pray. We need you to keep us rooted in history by sharing your memories. Psalm 71:18, the poet says, even when I'm old and gray, don't forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come. Share those memories, just like Moses tells the people to do. Tell us how God has been faithful in your years. Use that to encourage us. Keep us grounded and rooted by sharing your memories. And especially to grandparents, you know the studies that talk about how important you are to your grandkids. That 95% of young people say their grandparents were very influential. That 88% say that their grandparents were special because they gave them unconditional love and support. And studies have shown that people remember a story better if it's told by an older person. The influence you can have on your family, grandparents, is enormous. Don't shy away from that. We need you to give us perspective on suffering because you've been through a lifetime. You've been through ups and downs. I've been greatly encouraged by our older people as they've told me they've had some of the same struggles I have, and they've very carefully and lovingly guided me through how they dealt with that. Give us perspective on suffering by telling us what a lifetime of faithfulness has been like for you, and be honest about your difficulties through that time. And then finally, I know this sounds morbid, but I'm telling you, we need you when it comes your time to show us how to die well. And what I mean by that is those of us who think we're invincible, that we're never going to die, because you know what it's like to feel younger and you think you're never going to die. And I've talked to some of you who are in the oldest generation and you are anticipating that home with God. And we need you to show us when it comes your time what it's like to walk faithfully with God in those days. We need you to model for us what that looks like. So I want to give you some encouragement. In Isaiah, the poet there has God saying to his people, even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he who will sustain you. I've made you and will carry you. I will sustain you and rescue you. Look at that word sustain. God is sustaining you even in your old age and gray hairs. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Guggenheim at age 90. Grandma Moses was painting at age 100. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. was writing and presenting poetry into his mid-80s. And his son, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at age 90. You have much left to offer in your years. Normally right now I might tell stories of Memorial Road members who were doing this, but I imagine this week trying to call someone and say, hey, I'd like to use you as an example of an awesome old person. How do you feel about that? I'm not sure how those responses would have been, but I see you serving. I see you helping us prepare for worship. I see you going to the hospital and visiting people, even your friends. I see you creating atmospheres at funerals that are blessings to families. I see you, older people, and your ministry is important. It is not unnoticed. I see how you serve your fellow Christians and our community. But I would maybe say this. Maybe you want to approach it. I'm going to show a real quick 1-minute video clip. I would encourage you to approach your age like this guy.
Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
I love how he just takes a drink of water when he's done, like, boom, I've just said it. What are you going to do about that? And Mondale will say that's the moment at which he knew he had lost the election. And his laughing was just a cover for his internal tears. I want to end with us practicing that verse in Leviticus. So here's what I want us to do. We've done this for students. I want us to do this for our older people. I want the rest of us to stand. And if you are, I'm just going to say mid-70s and up. Now, some of you are going to say, hey, I'm that age, but don't count me as part of that group. Fine. If you want to resist that, then more power to you. I'm fine with that. I want us to surround our oldest people for just a minute. We're going to do a biblical thing of speaking a blessing on them. Would you stand for just a minute? Would our older people remain seated? Would you who are standing find someone close to you, if you can see them, just be around them. We're going to have some words on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to say the things in bold print. Go ahead and put that up on the screen. So when we get to something in bold print, say it with me, okay? May the Lord bless you, you who have reached old age. May He make His face to shine upon you. Your years of faithfulness have not been in vain. We will not forget. Your acts of service have not gone unnoticed. We will not forget. Your endurance in the midst of suffering has sustained us. Your joy in the midst of hardships has inspired us. We will not forget. Those who feel lonely, lift up your eyes to the God who brings presence. Those who grieve the loss of a spouse or family or friends, lift up your eyes to the Lord who gives comfort. Those whose health is failing, lift up your eyes to the Lord who gives life. And those who see the end of life approaching, lift up your eyes and see the risen Christ. For all whose hair has grayed, whose steps are unsteady, and whose eyes are failing, may your hope be strong. Take courage. The Lord is near. May God bless you. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you very much. Roberta Thomas died old and full of years on February 25th, 2010, at age 95. She had a 71-year marriage, and in her lifetime, she lost 2 kids and 1 grandson. But she was survived by 1 child, 7 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 8 great-great-grandchildren. And I am here because of her, an old woman who dreamed dreams. She always knew I was going to be a preacher, and I am. If you are not a Christian, there is an older person who is concerned about you, and they are praying for you. I guarantee it. And you shouldn't become a Christian because of pressure for someone else. You should do it because you want to obey the gospel, because you want to follow Jesus. But I'm telling you, someone's praying for you. Someone's concerned about you. If you don't know the Lord, there is an older person who desperately wants you to do that. And we want you to do that today. If we can minister to you, if we can pray for you, if we can serve you, please come let us know how we can do that while we stand and sing.